Hello, my name is Stephanie Kidd and I'm from the Kentucky Valley Educational Co-op. I'm here today to talk about multiplication of fractions and also division of fractions. This is a very hard subject for our students to understand due to the fact that they don't always understand why when they multiply that, especially when they've just been given the algorithm, that the numbers actually get smaller. And they're used to multiplication and the numbers get larger. And then with division, it's usually the opposite way around. So they're very confused about what is really happening with fractions. And I know that we don't always give our students the opportunity to play a lot with different manipulatives with fractions. And we tend to set out with like the set, or we use just circles, those kind of things. But one of the things that we really have to do is we have to make sure that our students are understanding that fractions, they're not complex. They're just a number. They're a number on a number line, and so we have to do this multiplication on a number line. We also have to do fractions with different types of fractions. So with squares, fraction squares. And that may be one of the things that we use. So we may use fraction squares. We may also use fraction strips. So fraction strips look like this. And so you may be using some of those. But you can also use overlays or what we call fraction multipliers. So this is really important for our students. I want them to understand fractions using many, many models. But most of all, I want them to also use a number line. So when we're working with our students and we're working with multiplying fractions and dividing fractions, I want them to use the CSA model. And the CSA model is concrete, which is, of course, the manipulatives, and then semi-concrete, which is drawing it, and we're going to go through that today. And then, of course, the abstract is actually writing out the problem and later on understanding how that algorithm happens. So we're going to begin today. I'm going to walk you through some examples. I'm going to use, of course, the fraction multipliers, and we're going to also use the fraction squares, and I'm going to draw it. And then on top of that, we're going to do a number line. And I really want you to see how important that number line is for our students. So let's get started. So today, our first one that we're actually going to talk about is going to be 3/4 times 1/2. Now, one of the things that I'm going to tell you is we are going to use some color coding too. It's extremely important for our students who have a disability or struggle in math to have color coding and to have very much a unison for things. So when you see me working through this and drawing, you'll see that I say, okay, we always put the first number on the top, we always put the second number on the side, we're going to color code this way, we're going to do this. So you'll see that as we're working through these. The other thing that I want to make sure that you do, like I said, is this number line, because it's extremely important for fractions, because fractions are a number on the number line. So let's get started with 3/4 times 1/2. Now, just like in multiplication, this is 4 groups of 3. This is 3/4 groups of 1/2. We can say it that way. So I always look at the whole, right? Always looking at the whole. So this is the whole. And if I'm looking at this, I'm wanting to know, I'm going to do 3/4. Grab out some 3/4 here. Now, so we know there's 3/4. We're going to cover up our whole, which is 4/4, right? We're going to look at 3/4. And we're going to look at what does it take to cover up the 3/4. Also, we need to know 1/2. So that's where I'm going to, right now, I'm looking at 3/4 groups of 1/2. So if I'm looking at that, what can I use to see these individual groups? Well, guess what works here? Eighths. Eighths work. So I'm going to put my eighths on here. I put my eighths on here. And now what did I say I was looking for? 3/4. So if I'm looking for 3/4 group, I know that it's going to be this many because that's 3/4. But I'm only looking at 3/4 of the half, which is how many? 1, 2, 3. 3 out of what was my whole? Eighths. So that's how I get that 3/8. Now, let's look at that using some color coding. Now, if I'm doing color coding, first of all, I'm going to use some squares or rectangles. And it'll probably be a rectangle because I'm not really good at drawing. So let's draw my rectangle. And 3/4 is what I want to color in this way. Now, I tell my kids that remember that fractions are divided evenly, so these will be even groups of fourths. And I'm going to color code my 3/4 this way, as you can see. Now, I'm going to do my half this way. Now, if I've done 3/4 of a half and then I color in my half with green this way, I'm looking at the ones that I have both colors in. This is really important for my students. Which ones do I have both colors in? So if I'm looking for both colors, I've got 1, 2, 3 of the pieces that have both colors, and I have how many total colors out of 8. So 3/4 out of 3/8 is my answer. Now, I'm going to go back and I want you to see this using the overlays because this is awesome when you can see it with the overlays. So, I've got 3/4 here, as you can see, and I have a half. Now, I'm going to turn these the opposite way. I can do it this way. You can see how this is a half and this is 3/4, and when I do this overlay, how this becomes the green. This is so good for our students. And so 3 out of how many? 8. So we can see how this multiplication works. Now, that's with an overlay. Let's talk about it on a number line. So if I'm looking at a number line, and this is my number line, I have 3/4 of a half. Remember what I said? And so I'm going to make 3/4 groups, right? So it's going to be 3/8. This is so cool. 3/4 groups of a half. So if I'm doing this, this is 0, and this is 1. And I'm making 3/4 of a half. 3/4 of a half. My half is here. Now, I have to do 3/4 inside of this, right? So if I go 1, 2, 3, this becomes my 4/4 at this point, right? But remember, we're doing this out of a whole, which means this becomes 8/8. Let's look at this. 3/4 of a half. 3/4 of a half is this right here. Well, 3/4 of a half is, these are 8s now. 1, 2, 3, 3/8. So I can start to see that. And I love this because what's 3/4 of a half? It's 3/8. Okay, so this next one that we're going to do is 1/2. Oops. Times 1/3. So now that we see 1/2 times 1/3, we want to look at this as, again, a whole. So I have my whole. And we're going to have our half pieces. and I'm going to look at my 1/3. So a half of a third. So now I'm going to say, okay, I'm looking at my thirds, which they're right here. Now, if I look at this, how is this broken up? Well, by sixths, right? I can break this up by sixths because truthfully, this half is right here. I can break this up by sixths. So my whole again is a what now? It's a sixth. Now I'm looking at just a third. What is half of a third? It's 1/6. It's so easy, isn't it? I mean, it's just 1/6, and they can see it. They saw what a half of a third was 1/6. And so if we build this 6 back up here, which we can, they can see that half of that third is 1/6. It's just this one. So I really like that. Now, the overlays. Again, like I said, I love these overlays. So if I do a half, and let's just do it this way. I've got a half. Now I've got a third, so we've got a half of a third, and I do my overlays. 1 out of how many total? 6, 1/6 of it. That's great to see. I love that we can see that. So again, like I said, I'm putting this down here. 1, because of the green, 6. So that's awesome. So let's draw it. Because remember, the CSA model, we have to have that semicolon create, because when our students actually draw this out, it's doing an imprint to their brain. So we want that to happen for our students. So again, I'm just going to draw my rectangle here, 1/2 this way, and I'm going to go ahead and color that in. Got 1/3 going this way. Now this is, our students may have a little trouble breaking that up. So I'm 1/3 this way. I'm only coloring in 1/3. Again, where do you see 2 of the colors? 1 piece out of 6. Now this one is fun. So here's my number line, right? And again, 1/2. Now I'm looking for 1/2 of a third. Wow. So there's half, but I'm looking for 1/2 of a third. So if that's half and I'm looking for thirds, and I know this is going to be 3/3, where is 1/3? Where is 2/3? They probably should be closer together, but now I'm looking for this amount here. So what does that have to be broken up into? If I know that this part here is half, and what's half in thirds, or what could be half, I'm looking at it, so 6 is going to be 3/6. This is going to be 4/6. Another one would be 5/6, 6/6. Do you see this right here? I'm doing this. I'm hoping you can see this one other camera. So 6/6. Over here, this is 2/6, and this is 1/6. Now, so what is half of a third? Because this is the distance I'm looking for. What is half of that? Well, half of that distance, if this is 0, is right here. So this is half of 1/3, which is 1/6. I love being able to see this on a number line and talk to our students. They could fold it if they needed to. This was a number line in which they could do their equivalent fractions down, and then they could fold it. They could see this is 1/6. I'm folding it, fold it, and fold it, and this is what it is. Love that opportunity for them. Now, let's talk about divide. Because for my students, multiplying when they could do this part was really easy. But with divide, it was really, really hard. So I like to start with things like 3/4 divided by 1/4. So just like in division, 12 divided by 4, it's asking how many groups of 4 do I have in 12. So if I'm working with this, and my students can see this, I've got 3/4. Let me get my force back out again. What it's asking is, this now becomes like my whole. So how many of these do I have in 3/4? Well, I have 1, 2, 3. So my answer technically is 3. I have 3 of these inside this. So let's get a little bit more information. Let's do it real quick on a number line. I'm going to just do this one on a number line. And then we'll work through some other ones talking about how they can be. So with the number line, this is 1. I'm looking at 3/4, which will be here. We know this is a half. We also know this is 2/4, and we know this is 1/4. Now, with that in mind, I said how many fourths are in 3/4? Well, here's 1/4. Here's 2/4. Here's 3/4. There's 3. So my answer is 3. See how easy it is for them to see that one? Start out with things like this so they can start to see it. Now, let's go to a little bit harder. Let's go back to our original one. So, 3/4 divided by half. Now, again, let's look at our whole. Let's look at 3/4. I'm going to go ahead and look at 4/4. And I'm going to look at it being divided up into a half. So how many, this is my question. For this one, how many groups here of a half is in 3/4? So if I'm looking for half of 3/4, wow, that's a little bit more difficult, right? So let's look at how many pieces are here. It's in a half of 4. We're looking at 4 pieces, right? Okay, we're looking at 4 pieces. Keep that in mind. So I'm looking at 4 pieces total. Now, my total now becomes 4 because it's actually, I'm breaking it down to eighths. Now I'm only looking at 3/4. So if this is my total, I know I have 1 whole and I have 2/4. Or I have 6 pieces out of my whole, which was 4s. Wow, that's a big thing to see. Now let's also look at it with our fraction multipliers. So 3/4. How many halves do I have in 3/4? I have 1, right? I have another 4/4. So right here, I actually have 1 and a half. I have 1 and another piece left out of a half, right? So see how we can see that? Now, let's go back and go 1 step further. So like I said, I got 1, 1 and a half, because I can see it here. Because this will reduce down to 1 and a half. But let's go 1 step further. Let's look at it on a number line. Again, 0, and 1. This is saying how many halves are in 3/4. So, and this is a half, we know that. So this is 1. And if I'm looking over here, I don't have another whole half, but I have a half of a half. So it's 1 1/2. Again, 1 1/2. So let's go on and look at this again. Let's look at another problem. Make sure that we can explain it. This time I'm looking at a half divided by 1/3. Now, like I said before, we're going to look at the fraction model here. So I have halves, and I'm going to look at them as a whole again. And this time we're dividing by 1/3. So how many 1/3 are in a half? Can you start to see this already? How many thirds are in a half? I can lay it down like this if I wanted to. I can lay it crossways too, because sometimes that's important. And I'll show you how to draw this too for our students to see. Actually, let's go back real quick and let's draw this one out if I was using a rectangular model and what I would do with it. So if I was drawing this out, I'm going to actually use 2 separate drawings. So, oops. So let's go back and let's draw this out. So again, just like with my other one, I want to do 2 separate ones here. So again, this is 3/4 divided by 1/2, right? And so I'm going to put it here, 3/4 divided by 1/2. I'm going to go ahead and label this one 3/4. I'm labeling this one 3/4 the same way. Those are not the straightest lines. And I want to label this way a half. Now I'll go ahead and draw that in a half. Now what I'm worried about is the half on this side. How many pieces is that half? Well, it's 1, 2, 3, 4. So my total group is 4. So how many in these 3/4, which is down through here, do I have 4? How many pieces do I have here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it's 6/4. But I can say 1, 2, 3, 4 is 1 2/4. Or I can say it's 1 1/2. This is so important for our students. Make sure that they understand that. This is where they're at, and this is what they're needing to do, and those kind of things. They can draw this out, and they can understand that part. Now, let's move on to this one. Now, this one, like I said, we can start to see it because we have a half, we have a third. Can you see the division that's going on here? It's half of this one. You could fold it. It's 1 1/2, right? We know that because we can see it here. This is 1/3, right? And a half of one. Wow. So a half of a third, but how many is this really divided into? Let's look at that. So I'm going to go ahead. Let's draw the boxes first. I'm going to go ahead and just do the boxes first. So I'll do those down here. So let's, again, this is a half. This one's going to be a half. And then, of course, the thirds. And this is going to be 1/3 too. Now I'm going to go ahead and mark this one. Marking this one, which is 1, 2. How many pieces do I have? I have 2. Now come over here. I'm looking for how many groups do I have in here? Here's 2, and I only have a half of another 2, so it's 1 1/2. Now, let's go up here and look at it here on a number line. So, of course, how many 1/3 are in a half? If I go back and I look at this, and I say this is 0, this is a half, and this is, we know that 1/3 is about right here, and 2/3 is here, right? And we know that, well, 2/3, and this is, we're going to say this is 1. I can look at that and see that I can fold that. This is 1/3. So I've got one whole 1/3 one, and I've got a half, literally a half of another 1/3. I don't have a whole one. I'd have to fold it up. And I can see that I have a half, so this answer is 1 1/2. Or if I can look at it, and I did smaller chunks because I broke this up into 6s, again like we did before. And so I broke this up into 6s, and let's say we did that. This is 0, and this is 1/6, 2/6, 3/6, which we know is a half. I love this because when my kids would do this enough, those equivalent fractions was like right there. And this is so important for our kids when they're doing, especially with the multiplication part of it, when they're doing ratios and they're doing proportions, and they get those in their head. 4/6, 5/6, and they'd see that that was 2/3. Man, it's great. 6/6, and that's 1. So when I can see this, and then I say, okay, I need to know how many 1/3. Well, here's a 1/3, but I can actually break this down now that I know in my head where I'm going to. That's here. If I'm looking for the half mark, how many is in here? Well, it would actually be how many? 3 out of 2. There's 3 jumps there. 1, 2, 3. 3 jumps out of 2. Out of a half. There's 3 jumps in a half. So that, of course, is 1 1/2. So seeing that stuff is so important for our kids. And I have said before, with our kids, you make sure that you are giving them all the opportunities, and the CSA really does give them all the opportunities to get their hands on the manipulatives, using, even if you don't use fraction squares or overlays, or if you use fraction tiles, however you may do it, please just make sure that your kids are using the CSA model when they're working with fractions and they're seeing this, because like I said before, this multiplication and the equivalent fractions, it all ties into later on for ratios, proportions, those kind of things. So giving them that opportunity to start to see this and to build on it and to understand, if nothing else, what that looks like on a number line. That is so important for our students. So I hope this helped you some, and we'll holler at you later.